sharing that financial vision, right? Is it a common vision? Have you talked about it? And hopefully, you go through some kind of premarital counseling or things like that. And if you haven't, that's not a big deal. Make a point to go to some kind of, a class or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of them out there. As a matter of fact, I just taught one at my church this last weekend, but really to get an alignment on walking together. And the Bible talks about that in Amos 3:3. I haven't really read the book of Amos. I pulled that one up for this episode today, but it says, do two walk together unless they have agreed to do so?
Mhm.
And it sounds simple, but if do they agree to walk together? Yeah, well, we're getting married, so yeah, we're agreeing to walk together. But have you talked about one of the most important things? Have you talked about your finances? Have you
Mhm.
talked about, do you want to stay healthy? You may have one person who's, wants to stay in shape and the other person's a couch potato. So that can create a lot of resentment.
Mhm.
That can create a lot of tension. And, at first it may not be that big of a deal, but as time goes on,
Right.
that pebble in your shoe, so to speak, is going to start wearing on it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it's really about communication, right?
Mhm.
And working together. I never thought about this until way later in life, but somebody brought up to me once, marriage is a business partnership. Like it's
Taking the emotions out of it.
literally,
Yeah, you're right.
yeah. I mean, there's the spiritual side and all that. But as far
Yeah.
as like the way you function, it's two whole people coming together, not two half people, two whole people coming together with their own thoughts, their own vision, their own, all these things that you have to come to that shared vision together. You've got to say, okay, almost like in a business that you say, what are our goals? What do we want
Mhm.
to, you've got to do that in your marriage too. And I think
Yeah.
so many times we're not prepared for that. And we just go into marriage like we're in love, it'll all work out.
I know. I saw this fairy tale on Disney World or on Disney, channel, and it's
Movies,
like,
yeah.
oh, that's the way it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of emotion, obviously tied to, dating and getting married and things like that, or becoming, life partners if you're not going, down the marriage aisle. But it's one of those things that you look at what happens, and a lot of times, well, maybe it's just me, I don't want to say anything, so you don't say anything, and then it starts to build up, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of disagreements come from unspoken expectations,
Mhm.
right? It's like, I just assume that they would save like I do. I just assume that they would want to, and you may have one spouse that's like, no, YOLO, I don't want to, paying for kids' college, right? That was a
Mhm.
discussion I had with my previous spouse. The expectation, we weren't in alignment on what was going to happen. So we compromised and worked through that piece. But it was something that I hadn't really thought of it. When you're young and no kids or whatever, it's one of those things that, it's important to talk about. Let's put
Yep.
it that way and have that
Yep.
communication line. So,
Absolutely.
I would stress having, once a year, every January, doing your financial goals for the year, do it together, right? So that
Mhm.
way you're kind of on the same page and you're not just letting things fester. But that's a great time as you kind of start the new
Yeah.
year, setting your goals, health goals, financial goals, things like that. But do it
Mhm.
as a family, do it together, even do it with your kids.
Mhm.
And that way they get in the mindset of setting goals. It's important. It's important. So,
Yeah.
number one, commit to sharing that financial vision together, right?
Mhm.
Number two, and this goes back to, I guess the communication
Yeah.
piece, we'll just say that, but transparency and teamwork, right? Genesis 2:24, they shall become one flesh. When you're married, and committed to one another, everything comes together. And people try to solve for that. Well, we keep our finances separate or whatever. And whatever you do for you, that's your call, that's your choice. But you've got to still figure out how to work together.
Mhm.
Because even if you do have separate finances, for example, and this is one I kind of scratch my head at, you go through a marriage, you go through life with everything separate. And I've seen this with clients as well. One's a saver, planning and things like that, and one's not. But when you go into retirement, what are you going to do? You're going to not let your spouse retire and go on all those trips by
Right.
yourself? I mean, so it all ties together, but there is no your money, my money. It becomes resources, even though, team resources, even though you may keep it in separate accounts. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everyone has their, I'm sure, very strong opinions on whether you put it together or keep it separate.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
know people have their reasons for whichever way. But like you said, regardless of what account it's in, I'm by myself and I have like 12 accounts, right? So just,
Yeah,
regardless
yeah,
of what account it is, there's got to be that honest, open. I mean, we talk to couples all the
yeah,
time, and a
yeah.
lot of times on my end, like I have a lot of connections that are women that are making their own money, and
Mhm.
I'm blown away at how many women are like, my husband has no idea this or that, right? Like, or he does his thing, I do my thing. And to your point, like about the retirement thing, I mean, we have couples that one set for retirement and then the other one not anywhere close. And it's like, okay, but you're
Mhm.
not doing it together. To your point, it's like,
Yeah.
so one's
Well,
doing
and
all the hard work and then the other one's like, oh, I'm just going to take,
yeah,
she'll,
yeah.
he or
Well, and
she'll
and in
take care of it.
reality too, you never really know what's around the corner. I mean,
Right.
everybody goes into it, planning success, right? Nobody plans for failure, especially when it comes to a marriage and finances and things like that.
Mhm.
But, you've been divorced, I'm divorced, right?
Mhm.
So it's one of those situations where if you're not in sync, there's an opportunity, and even in marriage, of not being completely transparent, right?
Mhm.
Oh yeah, we've got my money, his money, and then our money, or whatever the case may be. Or yeah, I've got this account, they don't know about it or whatever. I'm a
Mhm.
spender, and that's really where it becomes, that's planting the seeds for, number one, it's not being transparent, it's not being
Right.
honest in the relationship, and that's where problems happen,
Right.
right? Whether it's income, expenses, credit cards that the other person doesn't know about, things like that, spending habits. If you violate that, you start to violate the trust in the relationship, right?
Right. Right.
And a simple solve for that is, number one, just be transparent, working together. But as you develop your spending plan and your budgeting and things like that, have some money set aside that, okay, this is going to go to you every month. This is going to go to me. We have the same amount, whether it's $100, $1,000, whatever. That's your number, right? As the listener, the viewer. But that's your money. You do whatever you want with it,
Mhm.
and realize that I've seen somewhere. Okay, well, if we spend money on something, we have to ask permission from the other person. I think, me personally, that's a little overkill, but having a limit set up, like, you're not going to
Mhm.
go out and buy a new car and say, hey, look what I
Right.
bought today, right? I mean, because that impacts, and so it's again, goes back to that transparency and
Mhm.
communication. And if there is some resentment on the other side, that's you want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to go out and spend this money. Well, why? That's not fair. Okay, well, let's talk about that, because
Yeah.
clearly there's some kind of an issue there. And hindsight, I think people should look at that up close early, as
Mhm.
opposed to just kind of hiding it or ignoring it and letting it go on, because it's going to fester, right?
I mean, I'll just be straight up. I was very guilty of not having a very good money mindset in my marriage. I made a lot of bad choices and I wasn't upfront and I didn't like to talk about it. And I wanted to control it all. Like I really had issues and there's reasons I had those issues, but it wasn't
Mhm,
about the relationship, but we never dug deeper to find out what it was. And so
mhm.
it's important, like if you're feeling those feelings of resentment, anger, frustration, whatever it is, like it's important, like you said, to talk about that because I think there's something underlying, right? It's
Mhm.
not the money is not really probably the issue. It's something deeper than that that needs to be
No, and
worked out.
you're exactly right, but if you don't talk about it, something's gonna happen down the
Right.
road, and it's gonna, like I said, cause resentment, in a lot of cases, divorce. But, again, this is, again, going back to why the spending plan is so important. When I coach
Mhm.
clients, on the financial side, and looking at developing your budget, spending plan is what I call it, right? You're gonna get together twice a month and have a little meeting. Just when we pay the bills on the 1st, let's look at where we're at. When we pay the bills on the 15th, let's look at where we're at. So that way everybody's up to speed. Everybody's
Mhm.
transparent. Everybody knows what's going on. You're working together to get your financial goals, and it becomes really easy, once you get up and running. I mean, at first, it's a little awkward, maybe, for some people, but again, have that money day to review your finances together. And,
Mhm.
twice a month over a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning before you get your day going is perfect.